If I say 18th century hairstyles, chances are that the first image that pops to your head is the big poofy hair like Marie Antoinette, and that's what you associate with 18th century hairstyles, when in reality, that was actually less than a decade. Hello and welcome, I'm Maria from Souther Time, and this time we're making that big 1770s and of the first year of 1780s hairstyle. Whereas in the beginning of the 1770s, hair starts growing a little bit off the forehead, but it is still fairly moderate sized. And then it drastically grows, first just in height all over, and then it makes a slope with most of the volume in the very back. And there's many different styles and versions of this. And then this continues to about 1780, where then the style starts getting rounder. And then by 81, 82, it is clearly already mostly here roundness framing the face instead of height towards the back. These kind of hairstyles are achieved with cushions and a lot of extra hair pieces. It was not expected for you to actually have that much hair, but you do need a little bit more length than for most 18th century hairstyles to actually achieve these hairstyles. Because unless you're using a full wig, you do need your hair to reach the cushion. And of course, you can add volume with fake hair, but you do need your hair to reach that end of the cushion. In the 18th century, women did not typically wear full wigs. Those were mostly associated with some sort of illness that would have resulted in hair loss, so that has resulted in female baldness. That was mostly ridiculed in the era, and it was not a standard thing like male wigs were. But that being said, hair pieces and switches were definitely a thing and very common in the era, and you could buy them for all different sorts and classes. If you were rich enough, you could afford real human hair. If you couldn't, then it could be horse or goat hair, or then even flax to mimic kind of the appearance of hair, especially like if it's mixed in with real hair, it isn't very obvious. And this sort of big hairstyles would have really only been worn by the very elite. The middle class did, of course, follow fashion to some degree, and they would style their hair, but because these really elaborate big hairstyles do require quite a bit of fake hair, even I require some fake hair, even though my hair is fairly thick and it is well into my thigh length. So, like, if I require it, most likely everyone will require it. There are certain really high hairstyles that I can get away with not using hair pieces, but then that means that there is going to be less of those like rolls and different areas on top of the high hair, and those really determine what the style was called. There are several different styles, and the specific style we're doing this time is called coiffure à la Colombe, so meaning hairstyle of the dove. Lots of these hairstyles were actually named after animals, oddly enough, though I don't really always see the association with the animal that they're named after. Like, for instance, the famous hedgehog, which is not that poofy big hairstyle that we oftentimes think of it as. It's instead the little fluffy bits that come out from the hairstyle. This specific hairstyle, called the dove, is really defined by not only having that big height, but also having that big roll that comes over the height piece that really creates that volume into the back, and then with having an extra roll underneath, and then the rest of the hairstyle styled as if I think they're mimicking kind of like the dove's legs with the side rolls that fall forward. There's a lot of interchangeability between these different styles, and you can find many different names in different fashion plates. And I don't think that all people exactly did, oh, this is specifically now the dove, this is the hedgehog, this is that. I think most people would just kind of look at what they liked and like kind of mix and match elements and do what they personally preferred, or well, have their ladies' maid do, because most upper class women wouldn't be styling their own hair. And though the middle classes, of course, did emulate the upper classes with their style, these really high hairstyles were only really used by the very elite people. Middle classes did definitely have higher hair in this time period, but they stuck to the more like practical hairstyles that you can do with a lot less hair and a lot smaller hair cushions, because hair cushions are very essential for creating that height. You need to have something to bring the stability inside the hairstyle to keep it up and to be able to hold the weight of hats or caps or whatever you're putting on top of the hair. So basically, the lower you go in social status in the end of the 1770s, the more likely you are to see the earlier 1770s hairstyles just continue on. Whereas when we get into the 1780s with the wide hairstyles, that again is a lot easier to do and a lot faster to do. So the middle classes and other people who have less time and have less access to different sort of hairstyling can do and can emulate. So it's really only these few years where the hairstyle really is that sort of status symbol that the other classes can't really emulate it. And though this hairstyle has a French name, it wouldn't necessarily be only a French style, because this sort of high hair was worn throughout the Western world in the high societies. Because you have to remember that by the 18th century, really the regional styles were mostly folk costume for country folk and the lower classes. The upper classes basically had a pretty much universal fashion. There are some regional nuances even to upper class fashion, but that doesn't come to like the overall silhouette of things. It is more minute small details rather than the overarching look. In the 18th century, the way they took care of personal hygiene as far as hair goes was very different than in our era. So in order to get this hairstyle to be sculpted properly and to look really like an 18th century hairstyle, we'll have to do 18th century hair care. That means we'll have to pomade and powder the hair. And that, of course, means that we have to start with dirty hair. So we're kind of ignoring the fact that not only is my hair dirty, but it has been going between like the temperature has been sawing between freezing and thaw like for the last week. So my scalp is really irritated and slightly flaky. So we'll just pretend that we don't see that and get on with it. So to start, we will need to brush our hair. But in the 18th century, they weren't really a hair brushing society. They used combs. So the way to start with combing your hair is you basically start the same way detangling as you would with a brush. You start from the bottom and you work your way up. And the difference really comes when you encounter a knot. Here is a knot. So the way, if you have a modern day proper brush where the bristles are flexible enough, what will happen is you can brush over that knot many times because the bristles will flex over that knot and slowly working it undone so that it won't damage the hair. But if you try doing the same with a comb, not only will it get caught there and you won't get past it, but also you will cause serious damage to your hair. So what happens when we encounter a knot is we start separating it. You start working slowly the knot down, but only like on the surface at first, because we don't want to we want to detangle it, not cause a bigger tangle. And because the bristles themselves are hard, it is not gonna work its way through the knot if we just pull. So you want to work it in layers. So when you encounter that knot, you want to gently pull it down, and only in like first in the closest part to you, and then working into the inner layers until all of that knot is gone. Now we will start with pomading and powdering the hair. So basically, not only is this the way of taking care of hygiene, so basically washing your hair in the 18th century, this is also all your styling products and the hairspray. This is basically covers all of that. So it makes it this sculpting of these very fancy 18th century hairstyles much, much easier. So that's why I recommend doing this. You can do it without and do it with modern products, but you will have a lot more flyaways. You will have to fight with your hair a lot more. So what we do is we start with the pomading. Pomade is basically different sorts of oils and waxes. The theory behind 18th century hair care is basically that we take these waxes and oils, and because oil lifts oil, so with this we get all of the oil off our scalp and get rid of all the excess oil in our scalp and get basically our hair cleaned. So not only are we going to put this on the entire length of the hair to condition the hair and keep it nice and nourished, we are also rubbing this on our scalp. So this will lift off any flakes you have, any dead skin there is, and get rid of those excess oils. It will emulsify basically with your own oils and clean your scalp. And once we have the scalp really well taken care of, we will take more of the pomade and work it into the length. So this is the part that nourishes the hair. This is the part that gives the hair also the sculptability of the 18th century. And this will also really help nourish those hair fibers, and this is why they could grow so long, healthy hair. But that being said, in the 18th century, my hair length was not the standard. My hair length isn't the standard for any era. There was always women with shorter hair, and in the era, there was a lot of like hair pieces and extra hair bits that you would fill out the hair with. So you do not need ridiculous amounts of hair or ridiculously long hair to do 18th century hairstyles. Most of the women in the era didn't have ridiculous length of hair to do these hairstyles. Work the pomade evenly throughout the entirety of the hair. How much pomade you'll actually need depends a lot on your individual hair and its hair health and condition, and also how porous it is naturally. Basically want to get it to the point where it looks wet, like kind of like towel dried hair. If you have any natural curliness to your hair like I do, this will really bring out that. Hair powder in its most basic form is basically starch. In the 18th century, wheat starch would have been the most popular one, but I'm using cornstarch because not only is it much easier to find, but also because I'm gluten intolerant, I can actually use this one. So what we do with this hair powder is we basically powder the entirety of the head. So the starch will combine with the oils and grab all the excess oil out of both the hair and the scalp, and that will clean the hair. So basically, this is your 18th century dry shampoo. And on top of the starch, there is fragrances in this that were typically kind of fragrances that would be not only good for the scalp and the hair, but also would keep lice and other nasties off your hair because they are repellent scents. And on top of that, of course, it makes your hair smell nice. But also, this is extremely messy, so that's why we are wearing clothes where you don't really have to worry about it. What I can throw just into the wash. So we start with powdering. You want to powder your hair throughout. The way I like to do this is I usually start with wherever my natural part is, naturally happens to fall. And I start from, you don't want to get it a lot on the scalp, but close to the scalp. So we're not really dabbing it into the scalp, on top of the hair rather. So you want to work in sections. I start with the section where, my natural part happens to be, and then I just open the hair and powder it in. If you don't have any colorants in the powder, if it's just starch, this will give your hair that grayish look that is very common in 18th century portraiture. But you could also have colored hair powder. You could color match it to your hair. I could have put cocoa powder and cinnamon powder into this to make it match my brownish red. But in the 18th century, that gray look was very common and desired.
At this point, the main purpose of the powdering is to get that shiny look and that wet look away. So make it look dry and clean.
So now that we're done with the initial powdering and pomading the hair, we are ready to start styling it. In the 18th century, when we do these bigger hairstyles, we use a lot of hair cushions and a lot of fake hair. These hair pieces were very common in the 18th century. Nobody expected anybody to be able to do all the hairstyles with just their own hair. So no matter what length you have, you can always add hair pieces to fill it out. We start with this hair cushion, and this is our base. This is what we're going to use to build the hairstyle over. This is just a ring that is basically, it's just connected on one side. It is about 29 inches long, and the girth of this is about 7 inches. These are typically made out of a knit fabric, and then they're stuffed with different kinds of things. This one I think is linen roving, but you could stuff it with wool roving, whatever you want to, but I don't recommend polyfill because that does tend to clump up in a way that isn't very historical, and also it can be quite hot on your head.
You start by creating an even halo of hair from the top of your crown forward. Then you place the hair cushion over that and pin it in place, making sure that it is really securely onto your head. And then you start rolling the hair onto the cushion and over it if your hair is longer. And then you secure the rolls into the center of the thing. And if you have bangs or other shorter bits, you will have to pin those separate. Historically, they would have been using the U hairpin, but you can use bobby pins. That won't matter. It won't be visible in the end. And if, while you work your hair into these rolls, if at any point the hair feels like it's not really sticking together, some part is not wanting to behave, you can always add more pomade to that. As you work these hair sections into rolls, you just want to make sure that the hair cushion does get covered throughout, and you want to make sure that all the rolls end up in the direction so that they point up away from the hair, so that the hair goes over the cushion and then comes the separate upper roll. And as you work, remember to leave some hair around the ears and at the back of the head. So when you are working the back of this cushion, be sure to only use the bare minimum of hair, only enough hair to get that cushion covered so that it isn't visible from the inside. If your hair is on the thinner side, you can definitely first cover this roll with hair to make sure that it isn't visible, and that will make it a lot easier.
Okay, so now that we have the initial roll covered, now starts the fun part. And here's where the variation in the different styles come. And that is what we do with the rest of the hair and any fake hair that we add into this. I am gonna start by taking a clump from the back. Now that we have this piece separated, now because this is going to form the top roll on top of all of this and make height to the back, then because of that, we are going to want some sort of filling in it to give it the strength to hold any sort of hats or things we put on top. So you want to put either fake hair or a little bit of a roll inside this. I am going to use, for this, just one of these modern donut things that is opened. I'm just going to take a few layers off of it because it is a little too thick on its own.
Then I roll the hair around the cushion and poke the ends inside the hair so that it is then secured in place and won't show. And this needs to be higher than the rest of the rolls in my hair. Next, the rest of the hair gets sectioned off. You want to separate pieces behind both ears. And because for the back, we still need to create that one extra roll and then that hangy bit of hair. The next roll-shaped hair cushion, I will be covering it with hair. This is a human hairpiece, and that will keep it from showing it, even though I have very little hair left, so it will blend into my natural hair. And because we're using pomade and powder, you do want to always use real human hair because pomade and powder won't really work with the plastic hair. And now that that hairpiece is rolled into the hair with a little bit of my own hair to add to it, I then secure it in place with pins. And as you can see, I have very little hair left after this, but that little bit will get mixed in with the hairpiece for the hangy bits, so that is fine. And then at this point, I decided that that very top roll that adds that volume in the back wasn't really full enough, so I decided to add a hairpiece to that. And I just tuck it in between the two rolls so that it isn't visible where it goes into the hair, and then I just work the hair into the already existing roll. This is one of the cool features of this type of hairstyles is that you can always just add more and more rolls until you get the result that you really are looking for. And now for those dove leg rolls. You want to roll a fairly tight roll and roll it all the way up to your face, and then you start pushing stuff from the center. This will create a roll that is tight enough and it won't collapse on you. You want to use long bobby pins, and you want to make sure that you push one through the bottom side of the roll in one direction and then from the bottom side of the other direction so that they cross in the middle. That will secure the bobby pins and make sure that the roll stays in place, and even though it is kind of looks like it's falling, it doesn't actually fall anywhere. Now for the very back, I use a hairpiece that has kind of a triangle shape to it and has two clips at the top. And then I pin those clips into place and then let it fall down with my natural hair. And then I fold it up, backcomb it a little bit to give it more volume and make it blend better into my natural hair. And then I pin that in place from the top. You basically want to create a big loop with the hair in the back. And then we finish the hairstyle by checking if there are any flyaways. We pomade them in place, and then we powder the entire hairstyle, giving it that powdered 18th century look. You want to make sure that the powder isn't super blotchy, but it doesn't need to be completely even throughout. Especially on darker hair, this powder will really bring out that curl and that shape of the hair. And now technically the hairstyle is done. On top of this would most often be either a cap or then all sorts of hair decorations and things to embellish the hairstyle. On its own like this, it wouldn't really be considered finished. You did need some sort of embellishment or cap to finish it off. I decided to go with a mixture of two different kinds of tools and a black ribbon. I pin this in place between the cushion and the hair rolls in the center. But you could also weave it into the hairstyle if that's what you prefer. And then I add some pearls to it and then feathers in the back. These decorations really determine the formality of this hairstyle. With these feathers and all the ribbons and things, this is definitely a more formal hairstyle, not something casual that you'd put on for everyday use. If it was more a daytime event, you would more than likely wear a cap with it. And here I'm wearing it with my 1770s round gown. Well, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please hit that like button because it really does help out in this universe. And if you haven't already subscribed and you'd like to do that, I would really appreciate that. And I really do hope to see you again next time. Bye!